Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Thursday where we are doing a deep dive into a neurodiversity subject. Today, we have a special guest, so we're mixing the format up a little bit. My name's Nat, and I am neurodivergent. I also have a master's in neuroscience. We are a social enterprise, and we're now 10 years old. How time flies. Our guest today is someone who I actually supported and trained many moons ago. And we learned about neurodiversity, understanding, and I thought to revisit and see how they're doing now could be quite interesting. Let's do the intro. Joan Laine is a strategy and transformation consultant at Turner Townsend. They drive people-centric change. They have a late diagnosis of dyslexia, dyspraxia, and or the ADHD. They have lived experience that has shaped how they work in the workplace and how they have adapted policies. They are a champion of neurodiversity. They have created a campaign called Just Ask, which helps foster inclusive communication, particularly around neurodiversity. They are part of a network lead. They have helped the organization become disability confident leader status. That's like the number one status in the UK. Essentially, it means the organization will try their best, but a leader status is better. Maybe we'll go into that a bit more. They also are proficient in a range of leadership and change management techniques, ones that I've never even heard of, but I look forward to hearing about them. And they are coaching a good mentor. Without any more delay, Joan, great to have you.
Thanks, Nat. It really is a pleasure to be here today. From our initial meeting in 2021, I've learned a lot about neurodiversity in general, and of course, my own neurodivergence.
Joan, just give us a bit more of some backstory from your own life experience, how you got to where you are today, understand a bit about your diagnosis, and then we'll do a nice little smooth transition onto some Q&A and look at some of your slides, if that's good with you.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of some of my slides, I've only got one slide, which I'll put up now and I'll probably pop it in and pop out. I'm just going to present the slide. This is me. On the one hand, I am a mum and grandmum. I have 3 boys. My eldest is actually going to be 40, which is just, oh my gosh. And yeah, lovely grandchildren, 2 boys, 2 girls. I've lived in France for 20 years, lived in South Africa for 20 years. And then back in the UK, call myself a global citizen. Late diagnosed with dyslexia, dyspraxia, and then autism, ADHD from 2021, which was a game changer. It's a life changer as well. I have become a self-advocate in neurodiversity because of my journey. We'll be looking at what then does that journey look like in terms of the first part of it, which was an introduction to neurodiversity from Matt, and the Spiky Profile. That's where I actually started my journey, and how that started to help me to understand actually who I am and why I do things the way that I do them. It's helped me to also understand my learning styles, just in terms then of how did I find out about it. I had entered further education studies, and it was my lecturer who suggested that I might be dyslexic and possibly might be ADHD, and I might benefit from an assessment. This is me going into academia at the grand old age of 58 years old and having not done any kind of formal education before that or tertiary education before that. It was a huge surprise to find out that dyslexia, yes, I suspected it, but I didn't realize just how much it actually impacts the way that I function, the way that I understand things, memorize things. I thought it really was just a thing about inverting words and finding it difficult to put together words in writing. So finding out that it's a lot more than that, and that it was also classified officially as a disability, that was the first part of my emotional roller coaster in terms of this is who I've always thought I've been, understanding that there were some things that I knew was very different, having to think about, so am I disabled? Am I not disabled? That particular question went backwards and forwards for quite some time, for at least 2 years, before I was comfortable with being that I'm disabled by the way that the world interacts with me. In terms from that inclusion point of view, it's not always easy to accommodate the things that I need in my everyday life. It's understanding that made me say, yes, then I am disabled from that point of view. However, I also discovered where my strength lies on the journey. I also discovered that for each of us that are late diagnosed, Or maybe you were diagnosed when you were young and then you're approached in a certain way when you're a child. But when you come into the workplace and into the adult world, it's a very different approach for those who may have had lots of support when they were younger. In the workplace in general, the workplace is not quite there yet in terms of the support that they offer. But yeah, so my journey from the dyslexia, then finding out about dyspraxia, it reinforced also that spiky profile. I'm talking about the spiky profile because it's very important, I think, that we understand, and everyone who may not know what a spiky profile is, that many of us who are neurodiverse, spiky profile is at the top end, I'm very good at analytics, for example. And when I say I'm very good at analytics, so at the top end of the spike, it's literally between the 95 to 100%. And at the bottom end of the spike, for example, things like grammar and writing, at the very bottom of the spike, then I'm sitting literally in the 5%. There's other areas, and it's literally you have that spiky profile. Neurodivergent people often have that spiky profile. Neurotypical people usually have the peak up here and it's a lot smoother. Understanding that also on my journey has been helpful. I think maybe if I show understanding that about myself has been very insightful and has really helped with taming the imposter syndrome. On the diagnosis journey, it takes quite a long time to get the diagnosis. And so there's all of these questions that are constantly coming. Am I dyslexic? Yes, okay, I'm dyslexic. Dyspraxia, what on earth does that mean? I fit this, I fit that, but I don't fit that. There's a lot of self-doubt that comes into it. For those of you who know the Kubler-Ross or the change curve or the 7 stages of grief, we absolutely go through, and I say we go through that. It's more a cycle than just the curve, because there's several iterations of going through the Kubler change curve where you basically find out about it, then you're surprised and possibly angry, then you fall into that part of despair, then you start to say, okay, maybe I can accept this. Then you move into, okay, so what does that look like in the future? And then you move on to adoption and commitment. You start looking at new ways of doing things. That curve, or as I said, it's a cycle, that happens several times until you get to a stage where you say, okay, this is actually me.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with the spiky profile, it's a good way to talk about neurodivergence because typically we look at it from a deficit perspective, which is depressing and also factually not true. So we'd often look at things that people aren't very good at, like can't read very well, can't communicate very well. That's only one half of the story. The spiky profile is looking at how spiky someone is. Yes, they may struggle at certain things, but if they struggle at certain things, they also benefit from certain things and have a lot of strengths. Where a neurotypical person is more of a jack of all trades, a neurodiverse individual or group have a stronger fluctuation. That was some of the things that we spoke about back in the day.
Thank you very much. So now, yes, I'll put up the other slide. So slide 3. As I said, it started with that spiky profile, moved on to the late diagnosis, and I've just mentioned the imposter syndrome. Now, all of these changes, they are life-changing. It does cause disruption, and there is a period of transition. The period of transition will depend on each individual, depends on the support that we have. It depends on who exactly we are as well. As a person, you're more of a go-getter and more introverted, and also it depends on your general well-being, your mental health, etc. I don't know anyone who's managed to transition from when they first thought they might be neurodivergent to when they actually got to that place of, okay, this is me, this is a new me, etc. I don't know anyone who's done it in less than 2 years. My journey, I would say it's 3. It's been 3 where, of that journey of discovery, a part of it was being the lead on diversibility at Turner Townsend it ended up being for about 3 years. And that journey itself, that's where I got into the self-advocacy. The self-advocacy came because when I asked for support, Turner Townsend were like, yes, absolutely, we're here for you. The company has been and still is very supportive. However, they didn't have it in place. They said, oh, would you like to have a look into it? We'll journey with you. We've journeyed together in terms of the discovery from a business point of view, and then from myself in terms of what my requirements are. The reason why I am pushing that self-advocacy is because I've also realized that in that disruptive phase, there are so many different choices that we have to make. There are personal choices, there are business choices, there are with our friendships, the way that we do things, trying to understand ourselves as we're trying to say to somebody in the workplace, this is what we need. We're saying that we need reasonable adjustments. I remember the first conversation and I was asked, what do I need? I was like, I honestly don't know. I really don't know. That space of not knowing. So I don't know what I don't know. All of these things leads to that. It's very destabilizing and it impacts our work. It impacts what we used to be able to do fairly easily. All of a sudden, many of us find that we can't do what we used to do. That is as we're readjusting. Now that I'm starting to understand my neurotype, there are things that I've always struggled with and they take lots of time. The heavy masking that we were used to doing, we start to drop the mask. Because we stopped to drop the mask, we actually don't have the capacity to do things in the way that we did before. This is where the disruption is. The disruption is it's just in our everyday lives. It's in what we do at work. Things that we found normal. And yes, I put the word neurospicy in there because in the indie world, there are a lot of different terms that we use. And some of them we like, we adopt, some of them we don't. Neurospicy is one of the ones that I like. And the reason why I like that is because my quirks, I understand that they are part of my neurospiciness. That's what makes me me. And in this disruption and transition, I was then able to actually just say, okay, I'm claiming that. I'm not going to mask that anymore. This is me. We start to discover our authentic self. And then you'll see me looking forward because this is really tiny even for me. They're my slides. The inclusive part of this disruption is it's linking into that self-advocacy. There's a part about being vulnerable, but in that vulnerability, how much do we disclose and how much do we keep back? How we find out about that is actually by making ourselves vulnerable and experimenting.
We've got people sharing when they were diagnosed. We've got a lot of people who were diagnosed later in life. Eveline, greetings. I was diagnosed late just a few years back now. Abby was also diagnosed 4 or 5 years ago. Rachel was diagnosed back in uni, but also think that they probably have other undiagnosed neurodivergents. Emma was diagnosed at 42, and Anna Marie still has not been diagnosed. Took a test in college over 30 years ago, and I was under the threshold. That, Anna, is a very common thing. If you don't quite meet the criteria, you miss out on a lot of the support. And Sam is an employer wishing to understand how they can best support their employees.
In terms of Sam's question, and also just acknowledging all of the comments about the late diagnosis, that part of it is it can be very lonely, even when you're supported. Finding your own tribe is really important there, to find a tribe that you're comfortable with, where you can be vulnerable, you can share, etc. From an employee point of view, or supporting the employee or the organization, that is where I learned a lot more about myself. And that's where the self-advocacy came in. The reason why is because I know myself. I've been me my whole life, right? The imposter syndrome that I've had all of my life. With the diagnosis, it gave clarity as to actually those parts of me that I was told can't be true. They are true. I could actually embrace that. That's really good on the one side. Then those parts of me that I recognize that I struggle and I battle with, and I always have. Where the self-advocacy comes in is being able to say, okay, so within that, there are things that I can do very well. There are things that I've always battled with. Going forward, now that I know that this is the way that my brain functions, I do things this way because of how I process things, I can change the way that I do things. So the ways of working. One of the things that we put together was something called Just Ask. In a way, it sounds condescending to say, oh, just ask. It sounds a bit flippant, but what I actually put together was a structure in which there's 4 scenarios that we can use in the workplace, and where we can do it ourselves. We can say, okay, when we're joining a team, because in consulting, we are constantly forming teams. We're constantly forming teams because we're constantly going on new projects. We are also constantly going on teams because we might be putting bids together, etc. We're always meeting new people, and then we're meeting new clients. One of the things in terms of that self-advocacy is if we set up a process where we have the tools to just ask in a way that is structured. I'll give an example of when we've just joined a new team and we can use the just ask to introduce ourselves. The format is to say, here's the team. And in that format, we ask, okay, so what are your strengths in terms of your ways of working? What do you prefer? How do you prefer to communicate? Then the second, so everyone gets a chance to talk about that. What are your challenges? What are the things that you can do, but you find you may have difficulty in? I'll give you an example. For me, my strengths are I'm a visionary. I think if I put up the third slide, just to give an idea of this one, my strengths, I'm in strategy and business change. I am a visionary. I have strategic thinking and in the change management space, so doing change impact assessments, etc. That's the actual delivery. I'm fairly good at the problem solving. Then I have my behavioral change aspects. So as much as I'm an introvert, there are a number of things that I actually am very good at. That is mentoring, coaching, and I have some good listening skills, etc. In terms of team effectiveness, it is about developing high-performing teams through that interconnectedness. My challenges are, as much as I'm visionary, I can actually get stuck in the detail. But from a business point of view, we all have to do project management. There are several ways of doing project management, and one of them is called waterfall. That is when you have to do all these detailed, and it's all these project management, something like MS project management. There are many reasons why I just find that I've always found it challenging, but I understand it's to do with dyslexia. It's absolutely the dyslexia. Also, it's the way that my short-term memory moves things into the medium to long-term memory. By the time I've gone across a spreadsheet, I have no clue what I was seeing at the beginning. This doesn't work for me at all, but on the projects, we need to use it a lot. For me, that's where I would ask for help. In terms of reading, writing, and spelling, when I read, there are things that I didn't realize that I literally don't see them. So I'm reading, but there's pieces missing. I can read it 3 times, 4 times, and it will still be missing. If something is needed quickly, then I would ask to delegate that. This is where I'm saying these are my challenges. It's not that I can't do them, they're just harder to do. Then organization and planning, ADHD, dyslexia, those are the things that I find challenging. What this does with the just ask is basically for the whole team, we could just be talking about what are your strengths, what are your challenges, and what are the things that will help you in order to be able to be at your optimum in the team. It really does help. It's changed completely. I've got my confidence back. It's changed the way that I interact with my colleagues because all of us are actually sharing the things that work for us. From a team perspective in the workplace, that's one of the things that actually makes that very impactful for ways of working.
You received a neurodivergent diagnosis later in life. What changed most in how you view yourself and professional path? You've already been briefly touching about this, but I'd love to know a bit more. What is the key difference from how you saw yourself prior to how you see yourself now?
The key difference is always knowing that I'm different, not understanding why I was different, and always feeling misunderstood because I just didn't get it. I didn't understand why. I knew I was different, but I couldn't articulate what it was. The biggest difference through my life, whether it's professionally or at home, it's given me more confidence to know, okay, these things that you knew about yourself that you kept on saying or others kept on saying it wasn't correct, they are true. That validation is really important. It's just having that, okay, that's who I am. Finding my authentic self for the first time. I've discovered it a few times and been told, no, you can't do this. You can't behave like that. You're not experiencing what you're experiencing. That's the biggest change I would say is in terms of my confidence is not coming from somebody else validating me. Yeah. It's coming from myself. That's the biggest switch.
I'd also like to open that question out to all of you watching, because I think it's quite an interesting question. You've got a lot of people who have said in the chat that I got a diagnosis later in life. But I want to know the next step. Was it even worth it? Like, oh, wow, or no difference whatsoever. We've got Molly who says, I think it's a great idea to share the wow ways of working with a team. As someone who is waiting to fund a private ADHD/autism assessment, sharing a way of working would benefit me in advocating for myself professionally. We often have a lot of things. Some people call them work passports, career plans. They have a wide variety of names, but essentially, how do you work? How do you listen? How do you understand? What's your preference can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, ways of working. But that first part, the journey, it's really getting to know yourself and understand that even as you're journeying towards the self-diagnosis, because it takes a long time, you're going to be discovering a lot of things about yourself. You're going to find people who are very similar to you. You'll get that validation anyway without the diagnosis. But sometimes we need the diagnosis as well just to feel that this is true. Get rid of the imposter syndrome completely. With that, as I said, your confidence grows more. That part of the journey, I didn't do it alone. I actually got neurodiversity strategy coaching, which many people aren't aware of, but that really does help. I also got mental health support because I went down into that depression because it's part of that journey of the self-discovery. There's no magic wand. It is a journey to go back to the professional questions that are being asked around how do I support an employee where we've gone through all of these stages and we've gone through all of these reasonable adjustments and the employee is still struggling and we're still struggling as the line manager or as the business. Every journey is personal. One of the things that I found in common for all of us going through our journeys in the workplace, my company, is a point where the language starts to switch to performance management. Of course, what happens then is that instead of bringing us together on the journey, we now start to sit in opposite parts, because at that stage also, the person who's going through all of those changes, if they have not got mental health support because they've never had it before, they don't know where to get it, or because they think that they've had it, but it's not worked. For example, CBT for many of us doesn't work. All of the mental health care that we get, the majority of it is CBT. This is again where the self-advocacy comes in, where we're saying, okay, these are the things, even in therapy, even in the strategy coaching. I was just like, I don't know what I don't know. So you're asking me a question. Can you please give me some guidance? That's where I started to get more assertive. That's the biggest difference in the change in me.
Joan, let's take those learnings further now, because those are the basics, like understanding yourself. Taking it to a more of a professional space, how did a late diagnosis influence your approach to leadership, especially in driving organizational change? Quite an interesting question. That did this kind of understanding the why and yourself have an impact in how you might help organizations change?
Yeah. For the question specifically on reasonable adjustments, disability confident accreditation is an accreditation for organizations who want to support their disabled employees. That can be people who have hidden or visible disabilities. The neurodivergent community, many of us don't feel that we are disabled. However, it's important to go through that avenue, because when you go through that avenue, you start to be able to influence process systems and process changes within the organizations. For example, the recruitment process. You start to influence how we write the ads so that they are more inclusive. They start to be more accessible. We start to influence from that reasonable adjustment point of view. If somebody's coming into the organization, or even before they come into the organization, how accessible are our processes? Specifically, because I used disability confident, it helped me to actually structure the different stages in terms of raising awareness about neurodiversity, and then also bringing on board leadership, the line managers, things like making sure that we had the training in place, neurodiversity training. It's taken a while. As I said, it's a journey. Then also making sure that we've got allies. What is an ally? What does that mean? But there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of getting together working task groups so that you can work on, for example, the recruitment piece, work on the communications piece, work on the actual reasonable adjustments, work with facilities. And so it's actually putting that in place. And that's again where the self-advocacy came in, because that didn't exist. I had to help put that structure in place. Today, we now have a neurodiversity network and group, and there's active work streams that are doing many different things.
Cool. Thanks for that, Joan. I think it's really interesting to highlight the benefits and the strengths that come from this adversary and how we use it as a strength. We've talked about the benefits, and I think you can't talk about the benefits without talking about the challenges. But as you rightly said earlier on, are we disabled? Yeah, But are we disabled because we are inherently broken? No. Are we disabled because it is a societal barriers and essentially the world didn't take us into consideration? Yes. The next question is, in your experience, what is the biggest gaps in how organizations typically support neurodivergent employees?
The biggest gap is on career development, for example. We've started to get it right in terms of being able to attract people who are different in the organization. That's great because we really are bringing in people who have different ways of thinking, etc., and the creativity that they bring, etc. But then what? We bring in somebody like myself. I was brought in because of my different ways of thinking. I really do think quite differently. So innovation, etc. The organization hasn't evolved fast enough. It's what they want. I spoke about, for example, the facilities, HR, those three are the main ones. It's for the systems also to have been updated so that they understand. What I say is when there's onboarding, you have your onboarding and you have your standard operating process of onboarding people, right? Then you have your standard operating process too, because the person has said, actually, I've got a wellness passport or a health passport and I need some accommodations at the time when you recruit. And so you kick into SOP 2 or B, right? In that one, ideally for an organization that's matured, that's grown and that's understood and has gone through the process, they would have your standard operating process for onboarding. And then they will have the second one. And in second one, they would have already, from an asset point of view in IT, I'm using corporate language, but anyway, from an asset point of view in IT, they would already have certain software, accessible tools, headphones, certain things that they would just have some of that in stock, the same way as they have mice, electronic mouse. They would have already understood that if a person says that they have sensory issues, for example, there's space for those quiet rooms. That's what's missing. However, the systems are still lagging behind. Then the other part that I said, the actual career development path. What does that mean? If I'm a specialist, which I am, why would you put me into a generalist career path that needs to be adjusted? And it's a journey. I'm not going to be vilifying anyone because the one thing that I experienced all of the time was that the will to actually grow and learn with us was there from every single person that I've engaged with. However, the systems have not been updated and the policies have not been updated. So that's the gap.
I think with the gaps, you're absolutely right. A lot of the time, I suppose the thing that I get hung up about is there is change happening, but I often wonder how meaningful the change actually is. Is it just a token gesture, for example? We briefly spoke about disability confidence statuses. For those of you who may not have heard of them or outside of the UK, it's like a badge and it's okay. So there's 3 levels. You've got disability confident, which is I swear to be good, even though there's no criteria. Then you've got disability confident employer, which is a few more regulations, a few more hoops you've got to jump through. And then the last one is disability confident leader, which is a bit more rigorous. Their type of things could be that if someone declares they have a disability, then you will give them an interview. If someone needs reasonable adjustments, you'll give them without a second thought. There's a few different practices. Yet the question I want to ask you is that even though it is a great step, and I'm not knocking the step because, as you said, change happens in small parts and it's not overnight, still though, is there any tangible indicators that real inclusion is happening? I state that because I've worked with a number of companies which on paper were disability confident leaders, but in reality weren't actually practicing any kind of meaningful change.
You're absolutely right in terms of the levels. So TNT is at a disability confident employer status going to leader, right? That second stage is where the work is done. The first stage, first level, you say, this is what I'm going to commit to. In the second stage, you say, okay, so you said you're going to commit to them. What does that mean? What are the KPIs? What are the key performing indicators? How are we going to measure it? For example, you would say, okay, in recruitment, it would mean we're going to put A, B, C in place. We're also going to measure the increase in people with disabilities that we're bringing into the company from point A to this point. For example, that would be one of the measurements. Then there's recruitment. I'm just trying to think in my head now which ones we did. But We put in very clear indicators, which are so accessibility. There is building accessibility. What are we going to measure? The first thing we're going to measure is, okay, here's the audit. What have we got? Before we make any decisions, let's do an audit. That's a clear measurement. Once we've got that, then we can say, okay, so what else do we need to put in place? It could be making sure that all of the lifts have Braille in them. For example, we're not going to go and do a revamp of a building and put ramps in if the building doesn't have ramps in. So if it wasn't the intention, we're not going to do that. That's why it's called reasonable adjustments as well. Part of the disability confident was also the awareness was really important. The first year, it really is just building awareness about what does it mean? What does reasonable adjustments mean? It keeps on coming back as a conversation, because what we want it to be and what the organization can offer, as everyone's trying to understand what it is, that's where there's the most blockages and challenges in the conversations. If the accreditation process is done where it is that tick box, then very quickly after a year, you're not going to see any changes at all. You won't see any changes in the organization. So they'll keep on saying that they are reasonable, disability confident employers. However, if we are actually managing what those changes are, we put in clear KPIs, we can see what those changes are. For example, I keep on going back to the reasonable adjustments because it has been the biggest change. It is about putting in place a health passport. We did that with task groups. We went backwards and forwards. We sat with HR. I saw there was a question about, can I have an example of a health passport? If you go to the Access to Work website, or if you go to the Department of Work and Pensions, they have the health passport there. They also have the Access to Work passport and the process there. It's daunting initially. So again, it needs to be a supported process. I found that all out because I had to go and find out all these things for myself. Waiting for the organization to give it to me, it's not that they don't want to, they don't know what it is. And even if they go out to look for it, they can't understand what the challenges are. It's just quite difficult. They fall short.
I think this aligns perfectly with a question we have from Fee, who I'm going to bring up in a sec. Let's have a little look at this question. Fee says, I think changes are assumed based on what people think we need, rather than realizing divergent means different. Thus, all our needs are going to vary. For example, everyone says, just do a mind map. To me, that is the worst. I need to see information in a linear way. My head and ideas are mind mapped already. What I need to bring it together, not scatter it even more. I suppose the kind of open question from Fee there is that, how do we get employers to know what we need if we don't even know what we need? These reasonable adjustments are only reasonable if they're collective. For instance, as an employer, how do you know what someone needs?
I disagree that they're collective. We could say quite often we need headphones. There are certain things, and there was a question about the software. Software that's often used is the Dragon.
Are you on about the nuance dictate software?
Yes, that's often mentioned. DWP recommended Glean, and Glean is absolutely brilliant for transcribing meetings, for being able to present while you're in the meeting. It's a brilliant tool. Even in terms of the note taking, it's brilliant. There's two things that have been a life changer for me, Glean and Remarkable Tablet. But I only got them at the end of last year, and it really makes a difference. Going back to why I disagree, there's a collective. We are as individual as neurotypical people are. That's it. We are that individual. We may have disorders that might be common. However, our needs are very different. For me, it really is about that just us. First of all, find out for ourselves. And Fee just said it. This is what I prefer. This is how I prefer the information for myself. But we can't do that if we haven't done that piece of work on ourselves, because we're always being told, or before, I was always being told, actually, you just need to do what everyone else is doing. Don't understand why you can't do it. You've been using Excel for 20 years. You should be able to do this. It meant that I felt that there was a deficit and I was broken. And then I realized, actually, no, I can't do it because I am neurodiverse and I just cannot do this thing. Once we realize that's where the boundary comes in, to say, actually, even if I spend another 3 years training on this, I'm going to improve by 2%. What is the point? I'm not going to put energy and effort in there. These are the things Fee has made very clear. For her, it's linear. For me, it's mind map. You see, there's already those two different ways. That's actually, in terms of the self-advocacy, it is understanding what are our preferences. How do we prefer to work in terms of how do we prefer to receive the information? I also prefer to have an agenda before, even 3 bullets. Don't give me a book. 3 bullets, then the feedback, I also prefer to have it bulleted. But again, not too much information, small bites of information, and I can move forward. Whereas before, I'd get all the info and go down the rabbit hole.
Is that what you would put in your ways of working or passport to let people know? Because I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, that it's a journey that you have to figure out yourself with your manager. I want to share Jodie's comment because I think it shows good self-awareness of what works for you. They have said, as an individual, I have found it really useful to tell my managers that I'm still learning and that I may need support in other areas. I like that to start with because it is true. We are always learning. Just because we are neurodivergent doesn't mean we have an encyclopedia of everything that is actually going to help us.
Yes.
They say that they are still learning. They want support in other areas going forward. In general, though, they think having a dark sensory space, headphones, etc., can help many and entities alike. So I think what Jodie is saying here is, while we all have our own individual preferences and it is definitely useful to go on that journey, there are some kind of broad things which could be beneficial for a large number of people. As an organization, let's say you only have a certain pot of money, how might you decide where that money goes in terms of making things inclusive?
Jodie's pointed it out as well. Many of the inclusive things actually don't require money, because they are to do with the behaviors. Somebody who prefers to have that quiet space, where it is possible to find a quiet space in the office, that's an accommodation that can be made. The question is, what happens if we can't? The whole conversation around inclusiveness, when we're inclusive, everyone benefits, the whole team benefits, the whole organization benefits.
Yeah.
It's really about, okay, so we don't have that space in the organization. Let's have a look and think, how can we make this work? Rather than saying you can't have it at all. You've just got to make do. It's the openness, being willing to be open. Generally, pot of money specifically for accommodations, the budgets would sit in IT for something like special headphones, for the hardware, for special licenses like Glean or like Dragon Naturally Speak. That is where the access to work comes in, and they give a grant for parts. They fund part of it, and the organization funds the rest. But much of the reasonable adjustments is to do with ways of working. It's changing our behaviors, and it is to do with the dialogue, and also ensuring that the dialogue doesn't shift to performance management because we're hitting a stumbling block. What we're wanting from the person who's trying to discover themselves and what the business still wants them to perform. That's also where, at the moment, it's a gray area. It's not easy to navigate, but it is about the communication. It's really about creating trust, just being inclusive, and both parties saying, I don't know what I don't know. Let me learn with you.
We mentioned access to work quite a lot. And again, for those who aren't aware, it's a grant in the UK which allows organizations to have discounted support for ND individuals. Sam mentioned, is this the employee's responsibility? It's kind of 50-50, to be honest with you. The general rules are, if an employer can tell that someone has a disability, which again is a bit broad in itself, they have to make reasonable adjustments. But with hidden conditions like neurodivergence, the onus does fall much more heavily on the individual, but the individual needs to have the knowledge to make those choices. I will say, though, that the current UK government is definitely cooking up something which I think is going to heavily reduce the threshold for whether or not you qualify for it. I would say, while access to work and different grants are beneficial, I think organizations shouldn't and cannot rely on them going forward. Cara, I saw your question. It's a great question. They asked, given the late diagnosis, did you notice any new biases or stigma in the workplace? And if so, how did you handle them? I like this question because we always talk about the before, and then once we get the diagnosis, oh, it's beautiful. It continues. So anything new that came out as a result of it?
The reason why I know that there was is because there was a period where I would just announce all of the time when I would meet when I'd start working with a new group, I would announce that I was neurodiverse, etc. It might just be that because I found the ways of working and I was able to articulate that in a way that for me is empowering, it might just be it's because of that switch. But I do know there was a period where I didn't say that at all. I didn't say anything. There was a period where I was really open and vulnerable. Then there's a period where I closed and said, nope, not saying anything anymore. Then there was a period where I don't necessarily have to speak specifically about being neurodivergent. I can speak about, as I said, my strengths and where I need help.
Rachel has correctly said that the application for access to work is by the employee. Then access to work do the assessment, and then the recommendations are given to the employer. One thing that a lot of people get shocked by is that it's not a confidential process. So someone in HR or a manager will be aware. So heads up. But yeah, you are also right, Rachel. It is a 12-month wait. While I think it's always great to talk about all this fancy technology and equipment and support available, the emphasis should always be on the organization. We're not coming to an end, but it is being severely impacted via budget cuts. I think as a neurodivergent person, the best thing, in my opinion, has always been to understand yourself better, to get better at articulating how your mind works in order to educate other people. Because as you said, Joan, you don't know what you don't know. I think when we see someone who is a manager, we assume that, of course, they've had training, of course, they have understanding in this. They simply do not.
I would say that it's still a journey of discovery. I think the onus is with support from the business. Definitely don't think it is for the organization to be the responsible one. We can help them on the journey because it is too new. What then happens is we get that tick box kind of thing.
The way I like to look at it is how you view your parents as a child, where you see them as a superhero who can do anything for you. But as you get older, you realize that they are just human and they have their own weaknesses too. I think biases and discrimination, maybe not discrimination, but biases are a very natural human thing. It's part of our condition, but it's being able to spot an awareness and pivot, which allows us to be better. It's been a really interesting chat, Joan, and I appreciate we've had so many great comments. I really love the interaction. We've had a great turnout. I would just want to thank everyone so much for attending, and it's been fantastic. Once again, Joan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Nat. It's been a pleasure. It really has.
Cool. Cheers all.